Archedon is a pioneer in the hydraulic construction industry. His projects hold 2 lithium industry world records. His innovations in plasma combustion technology achieved emissions breakthroughs for internal combustion engines. Tonight's presentation, however, is in a different realm. He was gifted with a profound and highly rare type of near-death experience-like experience. He will share the unique message from that excursion, the after effect of that temporary relocation to the higher dimensional realm that initiated his research. We are in for a special evening, and I want us all to hear it directly from the source. I will say that much of what we're about to hear is new, not even at the presses yet. So without further ado, please welcome, for the first time to the Vail Symposium stage, Archedon.
Thank you, sir. You did a good job. Well, hello. You know, there's a lot of gray hair in this room. I hope that doesn't catch on. Okay, just one brief moment about this question up here. I've asked this question probably 100 responses so far at the International Association of Near-Death Studies. I asked most of the researchers who are very well versed in all this what their individual questions are, and I've received some truly amazing questions and the answers that we can then deal with. I'm here to answer questions. I'm not here to pose conundrums and paradoxes and unanswered quantum physics and all of that kind of stuff. No, I'm here to give you specific answers from the research that we've done over the last 2 years. So, if you ask the question, we will answer it if we have time. Now, let's see if I can actually do what he's asked me to do. Aha. If you've been to Moab, many of you might know that spot. It has been a tremendous pleasure to be here in Vail. I have to say, the Vail Symposium group has been profoundly generous and kind. Gary has been just over the top generous. He gave me some really brilliant advice a month ago at the IONS presentation, and Gary, I want you to know I listened. Let's see if we can make it happen. And if you don't know James Kenley personally, the folks that are here, I can tell you, having worked all over the world in these kinds of events, this gentleman is one of the most consummate professionals I've ever met. You're very lucky to have him here in Vail. Believe me. Absolutely. So, I want to offer a thanks to those that are online, a lot of the folks from the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and Angela Harris, who has done so much work for IONS. Thank you very much. Special thank you to Sandra, Jay, I love you, gal, Jody and Jeffrey Long of NDERF, which is one of the largest near-death experience sites in the world. I thank you a million times for the help you've given. And I just received a text from him a few seconds ago. I won't read it just now, but pretty cool that he's that tuned into what we're doing here. And I want you to know, Jeffrey, I've not forgotten my promise. And finally, to Chuck Swedrock, a monster thank you to you, sir, for your endless, effortless, and unasked for, but given freely help, without which none of us would be here tonight. He is a marvel. He's literally an angel walking around on this planet. He's an amazing, amazing guy. Okay, well, enough of introductions and all that. Let's get to it. Just checking to make sure I have the slides. Yes, this looks like it's working here. Wow, that's so amazing. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the sources of data for spiritual experience. Where does it come from? One of those sources is called end-of-life experience. It was developed by a gentleman named Dr. Peter Fenwick from England and his wife Elizabeth. You should look him up. If you have not, we'll talk about him just a little bit later. But this end-of-life experience is truly extraordinary. Let me give you an example. I love the movies. As a kid, I always went. I still love going to the movies. And my favorite reviewer of all time of movies was a guy named Roger Ebert of the famous Siskel and Ebert pair. They both passed away at this time, but if Roger said go to the movie, I went. Anyway, He passed away recently, and before he did, he had a most amazing experience, an end-of-life experience. He visited the higher dimensional realm a number of times before he passed away and told his best friend about it. What he said was, it is enormously larger and more vast than the world we live in. And it acts in a completely amazing way that time, both past, present, and future, are present all the time. And the day he died, he wrote a note to his friend and said, this, pointing to this world, is a hoax. He said, this world we live in is entirely an illusion. Now, I have to say, what a profound and wonderful end-of-life experience for him and for his friend that was present. But isn't it amazing that Roger Ebert's last review was of the biggest movie that could ever be, The Whole Existence, and he was the star of that movie. Perfect. The Continuum of Existence provides new answers to old questions. Without a doubt, this is serious business. You know, to offer science and spirituality will cause fierce resistance to many. For others, they'll breathe a sigh of relief. But I want you to know that everything we're doing here is done with the biggest heart and the most love we possibly can. Our culture needs a 21st century worldview. We need it to handle how fast and how quickly our culture is evolving today. Look around, isn't it so? What does a new worldview need in order to adapt to this fast-changing world? Well, a new worldview must have three crucial elements, and these elements are not typically found in a worldview, frankly. First, a worldview must provide rational and comforting answers to three scratchy questions of existence. 1, birth and death. 2, why is there horrendous suffering? And 3, what is purposeful living? Second, it will deliver a scientific method for validating those explanations. Isn't it clear again in the 21st century that we cannot rely on myths without evidence, traditions without science, and stories that are losing their power every single day as new science is discovered? And third, a modern worldview will teach seekers, like many of you, how to experiment with and experience directly the promise of that worldview. I have no idea what that's all about. I don't know how to even kill that thing, except I'll turn it off, that's for darn sure. Okay, who did it? Come on, raise a hand, let's go. All right. So tonight let's explore the nature of the promises of that worldview, the nature of science that underlies them, and the explanations they bring that can inform the new worldview that we need. Finally, the Continuum of Existence delivers that worldview. Are we still getting feedback somehow? Or that's not me, right? Okay, good. All right, fine. This worldview arose by luck or by inspiration. Honestly, I feel profoundly fortunate to have discovered it. And the amazing thing about the Continuum of Existence that we're going to talk about tonight is not only did it provide the answer to the worldview questions we asked, but it also provided exactly the method by which it could be verified scientifically and validated. That should give us the right look at what we're about to see. I'd like to take a moment and share an experience from my own early life, looking back over 50 years. You can say that when you get to my age. I get to look back over a half a century. This sounds strange. But there are two crucial events that happened about 50 years ago. One of them here and one of them here, about 2.5 years apart. And the amazing thing is when I look back from a mountaintop of 50 years ago, it seems like those two events just went bang, bang. You know, it seemed like they happened like one right. You're nodding. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all had that feeling. Let me tell you the story of how I met God. Like many of you at a young age, I was confronted by the strangeness of this world, and I wanted to know what the hell I was doing here. I wanted to know the mind of God. Many of you know what I mean. You have this gnawing desire to know why we're here. I mean, not here in Vail, but on this blasted planet. And this desire to understand the world led me to a very, very rough neighborhood. Previous tenants of that neighborhood were Dostoevsky, Epicurus, Steinbeck, many others, Albert Camus. They'd all moved on, but on the walls of the neighborhood, they'd left a lot of poor man Banksy graffiti. And that graffiti is what we are resolving tonight. I was burdened with an immense weight of the suffering in this world. In my teenage years, I was struck by the horrors of what... I hit the wrong thing. I've got a new mouse here, so you'll have to forgive me for that little discombobulation. There we go. Okay. I'm trying not to do this wrong. Okay, here we go. I got it. I'm using my good friend James's computer, so we're just got it right. Okay. So when I considered the suffering, look, right now in this world, there are people who are being flayed alive in prisons. There are millions of children who are looking at their mother with hopeful eyes while she is completely hopeless at being able to save them. This is in our world today everywhere. This confronted me as a young man, this kind of existence, and I decided that the best thing I could do eventually was to take it to the guy who I had been told was responsible for this creation. You know who I'm talking about, right? Bill Gates. No. I'm talking about what I was taught there was a God. So I decided to go out in the desert. I lived out in a small town in the Mojave Desert. And so many nights I would go out and I would argue. And I can say that there were certain nights where my cussing became hyphenated. I was so determined to get an answer. One night I decided to make a contract. I said, listen, if you'll give me any answer as to this insanity, this world we live in, I will do anything you ask me to do. And at that time, I can say with all sincerity, I meant it. Still no answer. When I cussed him out, still no answer. I felt that the author of the world should right these powerful wrongs, but he did not, and I never did get that answer during those days in the desert. Albert Einstein was strolling along in a park about 1925, and he was discussing his burning desire to understand the universe. We could all imagine the rapt attention we would have walking through a park with Einstein where he tells you what he wants to do about figuring out the universe. That would be a pretty fun deal. He said this, I want to know how God created the world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon or the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest is just details. This conversation expresses the core element of Einstein's guiding principle. I want to know his thoughts. In other words, I want to know the fundamental principles of creation. 18 years ago, I was just over the mountain in Aspen. At the Aspen Institute was sponsoring the global celebration of Einstein's 100-year anniversary of his great 1905 papers. Considered 3 of the greatest scientific papers ever written, all written in the same year by a very young man. In no small measure, I share Einstein's path of wanting to know not so much this or that about a feature of the higher dimensional realm, or how someone's life was changed by a spiritual experience, heartwarming though that may be. What I wanted to know was what was its fundamental laws. What is the gravity? What is the space-time? What is the constraints, the laws of that higher dimensional realm? How does it actually operate? That was my sincere desire to know. In the 50 years since that time, I had a second experience a few years ago, which has led to the research I'm going to share with you tonight. I think, like Einstein, many of us throughout our life have wanted to know the mind of God, the fundamental purpose of creation, the fundamental meaning of this existence, not only of our personal lives, but even in the bigger picture. The project of science has been to cut through the illusion of complexity in our world. 1 million apples fell from trees until Newton came along and said, here's one principle that'll explain all the apples. Right? That's how we cut through complexity. This is the project of science, to do that work, to understand nature, physics, all of it. As many seekers know, many in this room, when you investigate the world of spirituality, it looks incredibly complicated as well, does it not? Can we agree on that? It's a very, very complicated thing out there to try to figure all of the things that we're given. Seers, shamans, psychics, astrologers, mediums, religionists, gurus, pundits, prophets, apostles, atheists, deists, all providing a multitude of stories, myths, anecdotal experience, and obviously some beautiful nuggets of truth. The amount of information out there is breathtaking and not without a fair pile of contradiction. It can stymie even a dedicated researcher. So tonight we're going to cut through the illusion of complexity that surrounds spirituality. I will now show you the entire written document of the Continuum of Existence, the entire Continuum of Existence. Now, it's not 500 pages like Spinoza, although I think you would enjoy this presentation, frankly. It's not the 100,000 pages of Thomas Aquinas or the 3,000 pages of Immanuel Kant. It is one page. And here it is. This is the entire Continuum of Existence. This is our proposition that we are going to test. If these 17 fundamental statements of reality are actually what is seen in the higher dimensional realm, they will be verified by the visitors who've been to that realm. In one sense, we're discussing a much larger universe than Einstein illuminated with relativity or has been probed by quantum mechanics. We're discussing the realm in which our entire universe sits. Now, I have to give you one important definition. I hope you can hold this while we're going through our event tonight. The definition is, what is a fundamental statement of reality? An FSR, just for ease of remembering it, a fundamental statement of reality. For those of you that have had a philosophy background, this would be called an ontology or an ontological statement. But it's just basically a fundamental statement of reality. It's a foundational understanding of the nature of existence. In technical terms, an ontology, an example, reality is composed of matter and energy, or there are many others, gravity. These are fundamental statements of our universe. So we're going to be looking for, can we deduce, can we elicit, can we excavate, can we discover what are the fundamental statements of reality of the higher dimensional realm? This is our task tonight. I think we can do it. Let's try. To understand the impact of what we're talking about, we need to take a look at the current understanding, scientifically, of what a spiritual experience is. And when I say current, I mean yesterday. The views I'm going to show you right now were in an article on NBC News 2 days ago. Skeptics declare that NDEs are hallucinatory experiences or confabulations where the brain generates vivid imagery, narratives based on fragments of memory, cultural influences, psychological processes. According to research undertaken at the University of Copenhagen, sensations associated with NDE are similar to what goes on in the brain during certain sleep disturbances, in other words, dreams. Or this comment: why Many neurologists believe NDEs have a neurological basis. This theory is reinforced by the sleep paralysis, which is also associated with certain mental health conditions. A 1994 study published in Lancet says it sounds that fainting encouraged NDE-like feelings. So in the world of science, all this information we're getting from all these spiritual experiences are mental disturbances, hallucinations, dreams, or the result of too much to drink. We can do better. And in fact, we're going to prove tonight that every one of those statements is guaranteed false, scientifically. Please understand that this scientific view is pure conjecture. It is an opinion. It is a belief. When you read any of these articles in any media, you start right away with, if they're talking about it, it's pure conjecture, opinion, and belief. They have not got a shred of evidence. The distance between these conjectures and the actual thoughts during a near-death experience is a vast gulf. It's the vast gulf defined by what the philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness, who I spent some time discussing with at the Tucson Consciousness Conference. Where we respect these theories, we have to put them in the proper context as being purely theoretical and hypothetical constructs, and they are. Thus, if fundamental statements of reality are not predictable, like hallucinations, dreams, delusions, and deliriums, but are predictable in spiritual experience, that predictability challenges the materialist view, does it not? Of course, it does. But let's find out why. We will demonstrate a significant data tonight that spiritual experiences can be categorized as a separate state of consciousness from these other states of hallucination or dream. We will further demonstrate that unlike these things, hallucinations, dreams, delusions, deliriums, spiritual experiences make fundamental statements of reality which are highly predictable. How predictable? Megan? Any idea? Nope. Bob? Gary? Well, I'm going to tell you how predictable. They are so predictable that I, today, armed with the Continuum of Existence, can predict what fundamental statements will be made in every single kind of spiritual experience. Well, that's not bold, is it, Megan? That's not too bold for you? Okay. Are we having fun yet? Okay, good. I promise you that some science to back up these claims we're making, so let's get to it. Myself and a team of PhDs have conducted an extensive experiment to establish that fundamental statements of reality can be predictably found in spiritual experience. Now, science is what? You know, there's a lot of scientists out there who talk about philosophy, and that's great. They're welcome to talk about philosophy, but give them no more credit than the plumber. Because in the area of philosophy, a physicist is no more qualified than the plumber. In fact, plumbers probably have, well, we won't say that. We need to understand that science is nothing more than a method of inquiry. That is it. When people try to use it as a dogma or something that lifts them above other people's opinion, they're not doing science. That's just opinion. Science is nothing more than an objective method of inquiry. And it follows a process that is like this. It's so simple. First, you look in nature and you pose a question. Why are apples falling? As an example. You then say, well, how widespread is that phenomenon? You do a little investigation in the world. Then you say, well, is there some way I could experiment on that phenomenon? And then you look at your data from your experiment and find out if it tells you something new. One of the things scientists have to do is look at all the other work that's been done so they don't repeat it, right? And then finally, if all of that works out, you may find you've learned something new. That is the course of Einstein, and that is going to be our course tonight. So let's follow Einstein's good advice and first ask the question. Hopefully discover something new. So the question we're going to ask about tonight is the nature of the mind and a subconscious experience. And by the way, look, your mind is part of nature, right? All of your subconscious experience is part of the natural world, no less than apples or gravity. You are part of the natural world. So it's perfectly appropriate that we use scientific methods to investigate it. To summarize, ask the question and see what we can find out. So next we collect data. Now our question here is very simple. Do the experiences of all the people that have ever had spiritual experience point to these 17 statements? If they do, then we've learned something entirely new. That's our question. So first we need to gather up some data. Now here, our group has put together 7 buckets of data. Looks like this. And these are some of the researchers who work in these fields, by the way. But basically, near-death experience, induced or after-death communication, like we just talked about with Roger Ebert, drug-induced mystical experiences, mediumship communication, end-of-life experience by Dr. Fennick, transcendental life-changing experience like happened to me and many others, and finally shared death experiences, which are where 2 conscious people have the same experience of being in the higher dimensional realm simultaneously. Have a whack at explaining that, science. That'd be a good trick. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details here. I'd love to tell you the story about my mom and her Virginia Slims, but we're short of time, so I'm going to save that for maybe the Q&A. But that's our first major bucket, near-death experience. Then we have induced and after-death communication. We've given the example of from Dr. Alan Botkin. I'd like to share that with you. He wrote a book called Induced After-Death Communication. I recommend it highly. This is the story of Jerry. One night, Jerry experienced a very clear image of his wife while he was sleeping. She looked beautiful, peaceful, happy, and she wanted to tell him something of great concern to her. The next morning, while Jerry was making his coffee, the phone rang, and his ex-wife's sister was calling. Tearfully, she told Jerry that his ex-wife had been killed in a traffic accident that very night. Since then, Jerry's ex-wife has appeared to him 5 times in spontaneous after-death communications, each time offering further advice to him about how he should raise their children. Every time, he said, she did the talking, and after each experience, Jerry followed her advice closely, and in all cases, the advice turned out to be extremely helpful. When Dr. Botkin asked him if he thought his wife had actually visited him when he died, Jerry said this defiantly, "I am sure of it. I'm as sure of it as I'm looking at you right now. Nobody can ever tell me it wasn't real, not you, not anybody else. I don't care what other people think because they don't know, they did not experience what I experienced. I didn't believe this stuff before it happened, but now I have absolutely no doubt." That is an example of an after-death communication. End-of-life communication. I did that darn thing again with your mouse. Darn you. Don't do that. Then we have drug-induced mystical experience, and again, I'll share a story if we have time in the Q&A, an amazing story of a girl who died of an overdose, then while she was dead had an NDE, and then came back in her drug-induced state and tells the whole story. It's amazing, amazing story. Then we have mediumship communication. I recommend you to Joylyn Jackson, probably the most famous medium in the world, and Dr. Julie Beischel. She is a national treasure. But I'll only tell the story of Tyler Henry, who has over 300,000 people on his waiting list to get a reading. He's the one that Netflix just did a big documentary on, doing live meetings with famous people. He even did one with a reporter live from USA Today, and after the interview, she said he got everything right about my family. She was just blown away. Well, that's great. But I was more interested in the interview Tyler Henry and his mother did with Forbes magazine last March. And in that magazine, that reporter very presciently asked the question of Tyler and his mother, what have you learned about the higher dimensional realm from all of your interactions with people and what you've received through these communications? What you see in those numbers up there are all the elements of the continuum that Tyler and his mother related in that Forbes article. That is frankly incredible. Okay, then we have, again, our experience with Roger Ebert in after-death communication. And then there's shared death experience. And Dr. Raymond Moody, by the way, has just come out last week with his newest book, Proof of Life After Life, and with a very beautiful foreword by Eben Alexander, by the way. And he has a couple of wonderful stories on page 116 about one of these. And Dr. Botkin's book also, Induced After-Death Communication, has a great many of those experiences. So I owe you something right here, and I'm going to try to do it. Earlier, I was talking about my experience out in the desert, and whatever happened. Well, 2.5 years later, after my many arguments with God about the nature of this world, I had a different kind of experience. First of all, I was in perfect health. I had no psychological, pharmacological, or physical problems. Secondly, obviously, I was seeking a very specific answer to a very difficult problem. And thirdly, I was given a direct answer to that question. I left off talking about my wandering in the desert, and the logic I flung forward I later learned was Epicurean. Since you know everything, you're all loving, and why? What are you doing with this world of terror? Well, I finally came up with a contract. I came up with what I thought would be the unavoidable net by which I could capture God and make him answer me. So I made this deal. I said, "Sir, madam, whatever, I'm going to show you that if I had your power, I can invent a better universe than the one you did. If I do that, you owe me an answer." So I said to him this: "Since I've got all your power, I can do anything I want, I'm going to make it a rule of the universe that no child, before they're old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, will ever suffer. In other words, if they get old enough and they can figure out what, and they do it, and then they got to pay the price for it, great. But no child, before they know that, ever suffers in my new universe. And I'm the God of the universe. I snap my fingers like Thanos, and lo and behold, it is the reality. Nobody would know the difference. That'd just be the law of the universe." And I said, "Ha! Here, a 15-year-old just invented a better universe than the one you did." Do you think he showed up? Everybody say no. Okay. Are they asleep, James? Okay. Everybody say no. Okay, there we go. We're cooking. No, he did not. Oh, there they go again with this crazy doodad. Ay, 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 ay. So, shortly thereafter, I was out in the desert once again with a friend this time, sitting on enjoying the beautiful clear sky. And in 1 second I was on Earth. The next instant I was transported across a spaceless chasm beyond knowing and put directly face to face with that great, unnameable, immeasurably power eminence that could, with a snap of a finger, create universes. And in that instant, I forgot everything I was on this planet. And furthermore, I didn't care. I had no more thought of earthly existence as if it had never happened. I was in a space of such immeasurable love that knew me so personally, so preciously, as if I was the most beloved creature in the universe. That I knew I was home. I was where I was always meant to be. And I had not the slightest wish ever, ever, ever to leave that place. If there was some way, for just a second or two, I could transport all of you into that presence with me, it would greatly shorten our discussion tonight. Because we would all know what I'm speaking of. We would all be able to share in that experience. It is beyond words. In fact, I had to invent a whole new word to describe it. We'll talk about that in the Q&A if we have time. But this is who we really are. So, 9 minutes and 45 seconds later, and we only know that that's Earth time because we happened to have had a watch going at the time, and my friend told me, I was drawn back to this planet. And I have to say that if you could imagine tiny Earth sitting next to the vastness of the sun, and you are a tiny being on that tiny Earth, and suddenly there you are, and there's the sun. So close you could just do that and touch it. It gives you some notion of the presence that you find yourself in. If you can imagine all of that, you can imagine where it was I stood. I promise you with all my heart that I absolutely had no intention of ever leaving that place. I was home, the ultimate home. And when my return came, I have to say, it was the coldest and bleakest transition I've ever experienced. It felt as though I had been almost reduced to nothing to be back here on Earth. Many people who've had such an experience talk about the trauma of that love being taken away again. I know now what I'm doing. I'm so happy that I just figured it out. When you talk about these things, you're talking about the most tender and sacred places of your soul, frankly. It's not easy to do. And I'm probably not doing the best job. If we had maybe some private time, it would come across a little better. But these events are incredibly, incredibly precious. So, we've now looked at all of these categories, and I think we've covered everybody. Yes, we have. Okay. So now we have to do something just a little more interesting, and that is, what we did was we found thousands upon thousands of statements people had made about the higher dimensional realm. And then we created a network visualization. What you're looking at are all the individual stories we gathered to try to extract these fundamental statements of reality from. I've told you about 7 stories tonight. That would be 7 of those dots. Give you an idea of the magnitude of information we're looking at here. There's over 600 of them. The different colors are just the different categories. The narratives are the witnesses, and collectively, those witnesses represent the telescope by which we investigate the higher dimensional realm. It's our James Webb to gather the narratives from all these different forms of spiritual experience. Now, the proposition is that if the 17 fundamental statements of reality are consistent and predictable, in a globally distributed group of narratives, they would present very powerful evidence as to the nature of that realm. Here again, as a quick reminder, that's the continuum. That's the entirety of those 17 statements. And after we get done, I'll be happy to read those. It's hard to do that on a short time. But now we get to the guts of the science question, which is, we then employed a natural language processing AI, artificial intelligence, to do sophisticated, and this data visualization, to do a large-scale text mining of these hundreds of narratives. Here's how it works. We collect the narratives, and you'll notice that we collect the whole thing. We don't curate, we don't try to parse it out, we just say we'll take all the information. Nobody's ever done this before. These are also nothing that I had anything to do with. I told the PhD guys to pick any narratives they want, collect them from any source you wish. The next thing we undertake is this right here. We ask the program, I'd like to know if in all those narratives, are there any fundamental statements of reality? And these are what they found. 2,965. Now James is a philosopher, so James, I'll make a little comment here that is fun, it's kind of fun. In the world, this is the largest collection of ontological statements that has ever been collected at one time in one place in the history of mankind. I don't know if that's a big deal or not. Really, I don't, but it's true. Now, what do? Well, by the way, this is the progress. This was only a month ago, and this is today. We went from about 1,000 to almost 3,000 in just the last 30 days. Now, what you're looking at are the little blue dots are the narratives, and the little tiny red dots, which you can barely make out, are the individual statements made by the people who had the experience. So now we have a data visualization not only of the narrative, but the individual comments that each of them made. And as I say, we've pushed that out to almost 3,000. In the next 6 months, this will be well above 10,000. I mean, we're just barely getting started here. Now, these statements are from diverse individuals from all over the world over many decades, from every culture, every religious background, every philosophical or spiritual or atheistic predilection. We then have the objective AI program, and I say objective because we have no control over the inner workings of that system. We simply say, can you find ontological artifacts, yes or no? If yes, please connect those artifacts to the 17 statements of our hypothesis. If they do connect, we've learned something very, very important. This would be a 21st century game changer. So, did we? To summarize, we simply ask, do those connect to these? In a very sophisticated way. It should be apparent that the crucial point here is that if the independent collected statements show definite structure, it means that they were not hallucinations. You can understand my excitement when they first did the data run after working on this for 20 months. It was very much like the birth of my son. I was full of trepidation, but once you set something like that in motion, you just have to let the baby be born, as you all well know. Well, I'm going to show you a picture, and I'm a photographer. I think it's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. What you're looking at there is the sun I went to. No, I'm kidding. That big orange sun is the 7th axiom of the 17 statements. The little orange circles are fundamental statements of reality. What you're looking at are all those little lines are arrows going from the statements of reality that the independent AI connected, hundreds of them, to the 7th axiom. This is a miracle of data and of understanding that there is a definable reality in the higher dimensional realm, and this is incontrovertible evidence of that higher dimensional realm. I received a text from Dr. Jeffrey Long of he and his wife Jody have collected over 5,000 near-death experiences on their website. He and his wife gave me backdoor access to their database. He sent me a text while we were getting ready here, and he said, "What you're doing is amazing. It's probably the greatest proof of the afterlife in the world today." Well, that's pretty high praise coming from somebody who's been doing that research for 25 years. Well, what do you say we zoom out a little bit? Let's go back and look at the rest of the data. Now you can see the incredibly beautiful structure that all of those little orange circles are statements of reality, and now they're jumping out and connecting against the rest of the continuum. Do the statements connect to the 17 propositions? Yes, they do. Magnificently. Now, in this slide, the very small red square is the very first slide I showed you. That slide. That's the entire data set. This is one of the most gorgeous pictures you'll ever see of deep text mining analysis. I could look at that picture all day. I don't know about you. I really could. Because of this data and my own experience, I can say that the higher dimensional realm is unequivocally the real deal. It's important for me to say that we have constructed this experiment open-ended. That is, I did not require the PhDs or the AI to be programmed in any specific way. If the AI had illustrated additional axioms or different statements of reality that came from the data, we would have simply added them. We were completely open-hearted about what was discovered. The statements made by the visitors to the higher dimensional realm connect perfectly to the continuum of existence. Well, 99% is pretty good. So, what does this mean? Well, one thing we should do is compare this to random data, right? I mean, if I said, what kind of data would you get from dreams or hallucinations? Look, you all well know that your dreams are crazy. You know, they're bizarre. If one you skip from here to there, it could be anything. And that's why nobody can do this kind of work with hallucinations or with dreams. But we can understand that they do have randomness to them. When we look at the scientific literature, we can estimate what a visualization would look like if we attempted to do it with dreams. And it would look something like that, where you have all these random thoughts and random experiences, but they don't connect in any meaningful way to each other. Now you notice that little black square, that it looks almost like there's a circle there. And when you have a limited amount of data, certain artifacts can look like they are saying something. But when you look at the big picture, it's plain that this is just part of the random picture. And so the larger the data, the clearer the picture. Very important. I need to give a special thank you to Dr. Terry Gilbert, who is an expert in data analysis and visualization, and to Kent at Exaptive, who was extraordinarily helpful in guiding me through the proper use of their software. So having established and validated our hypothesis, we can now make a future prediction based on the data. Remember, science is not only about figuring out your hypothesis, but for it to have power, for it to have meaning, for it to have worth, that hypothesis has to be able to predict events in nature in the future. So let's get to that. The data clearly demonstrates a tectonic difference between the neurological states described by hallucination, dream, and delusion, and that the spiritual state of consciousness found in these diverse spiritual experiences is entirely different. The data is overwhelmingly in favor of that. As a real realm, the higher dimensional realm should have fundamental reality that would be emergent and predictable, as has been demonstrated. Therefore, I would like to make a scientific prediction. Okay, anybody want to take a bet on this? I'm happy to take all comers. I will bet whatever you'd care to put on the table pink slips, that kind of thing, back in the day, that the next 1,000 near-death experiences or other spiritual experiences, no matter how they are obtained, will map out exactly like the ones that I put up here today. That's a powerful prediction to make about random people all over the world that I don't know, and I don't even know how they got there. It doesn't matter. If the higher dimensional realm is real, if it has these rules, these laws, these constraints, it doesn't matter how they get there. They're going to see the same thing, right? Of course they are. Like Einstein, we don't care about the specific wavelength of light or the individual phenomenon. We care about the underlying reality. Okay, I'm moving right along. I can't believe how good I'm doing here. Does the continuum respond to the question about a 21st century worldview? Well, it does provide rational, comforting answers to the three scratching dilemmas. It does deliver a scientific method for validating those explanations, and it does teach seekers how they can experiment directly with that reality. Now, when we have in the Q&A, I'll show you how to do that experiment. It's amazing how much fun it is. So, the eternal endowment of humanity is to have 1 foot on earth and 1 foot everywhere. This is you and you and you and all of us. We're going to create a mastermind group around the continuum to help figure out how's the best way to communicate it. I welcome anybody that's interested to get a hold of me. The great William Gibson, Pulitzer Prize winner, said this: "The future is already here, it's just not widely distributed." The continuum is already here, it's just not yet widely distributed. So as we close our time tonight, I'd like to tell you the story of you. And this is the story of you as illuminated from the continuum. By the way, that's the last stanza that Paul McCartney and John Lennon wrote together. I found it perfectly appropriate to end our time together tonight. So, if you would be so kind, I want to tell you that the important point I want to hold in your mind for the next few minutes is there are 2 aspects of you, 2 versions of you. Hold that in your mind. I'm going to use my brother Greg as an example. So whenever I talk about Greg, you insert your name. Put your name in place of my brother Greg. And remember to hold on to those 2 aspects of you. I'm going to tell you the story of you. If you'd be so kind to just close your eyes for the next few minutes, it will help you visualize and connect to this higher aspect of you. Okay. There's a little g Greg and a capital G Greg. A little u and a capital U. Let's start here where you are. In this little letter U universe, the small case Greg has arrived. Like him, you were born somewhere on this planet with a very, very tender nervous system, highly influenced by your culture, your upbringing, by the good and bad things that happened to you. They all molded your young self. Somewhere along the line, the little g you became aware of yourself as being a different person from those around you. You began to take on your identity on this planet as the little g Greg. You began to experience time in this universe of space. You age, you learn, you become curious about your nature. Isn't that so? Eventually you approach a strange moment where you realize that someday this little GU in this small case universe is going to die. This raises a question. Why? Now it turns out the entire earth is drenched in knowledge of the larger you, the uppercase U, the capital G, Greg. But you've been taught to ignore it, to hide it, to disavow it, to mock it as superstition, hallucination, religiosity, or some other almost meaningless label to get you to comply. But you don't. Something tugs and pulls and draws you to look for that capital G you that you left behind. You ask, as I did, what the H am I doing here? The capital G Greg knows. That part of you knows exactly why you're here. The capital G Greg knows that you exist as an eternal being, and it knows a very big secret. Don't tell. You have always had and always will have free will to choose your path through the continuum, which means, of course, that you chose to be an earthman or an earthwoman. Again, we can ask, why? Well, to answer that, we need to focus your attention on your capital G self, the big letter universe. And the answer is clear as a mountain stream here in Vail. It is first to experience mortality away from immortality. Secondly, to have a unique personal creative journey. And thirdly, to appreciate being separated from the vastness and immersive power of infinite love. And the cool place in the entire universe where you can have those unique experiences is right here on earth. Consider that momentous decision. Can you consider the big GU, the pre-existent you, the person, this creature that has existed, who knows, for eternity perhaps, decides to make the decision to forget all of that and come here to be exposed to the vagaries of earth life. That moment must have been a fantastic thing for each of us. I have to say, we chose somehow the higher value of contributing something new here on earth. But I can also say that in my case, I would not have chosen it based on my previous experience. I would have never left. Apparently the large A Archedon has more information than the small one down here. Finally, this. The third purpose of earthly existence says that we have a unique experience of our own creation. I can imagine the pull and intense curiosity about earthly life must have been irrepressible, so here we are. Now, it may feel a little familiar to you, and rightfully so. The continuum gives another secret. It states that there exists an estrangement field that separates our previous capital G self from our small g self here on earth. Without there being such a veil, earth would offer no chance of having this special experience. That veil is crucial. The first three axioms say that there exists a great creative presence that is manifest by something called higher dimensional love, which is entirely different from any earthly feeling. And that love is unconditionally given to you. So unconditional and so personal that it knows you to your last act and atom and holds you as cherished, precious, and beloved. And no earthly act whatsoever can put the slightest blemish or dent in that love. Axiom 10 says death is simply a door we walk through. Axiom 11 says time is not an arrow in the higher dimensional realm, just as our friend Roger Ebert said it was. Which means, of course, there, time can be treated as just another tool to gain knowledge. How cool is that? Now, some people have had the experience of oneness, merging with Source, having this tremendous experience. But I will ask you this question. Who is telling you that story? Well, it's the little g Greg version of them that's telling us a story about what their capital G Greg had with joining with Source. Now, this unveils a tremendous truth. Let me ask you this question. Who is telling the story of the merging? That's right. The little g person that's here on this planet, which means something amazing. It means that we can engage in that free will to not only join with Source, but have the free will or the freedom to then engage back into our capital G self and experience the great continuum of creativity in all its vastness. An amazing opportunity, amazing thing to think about. Listen, last thought. Please consider with me all of the great art galleries in the world. Many of you have been to many, many, many of them, I know. I have. I love them. Now imagine that we took all the art from all the galleries of the world and we put them on the walls of one gigantically long gallery wall. That would be a very long hallway. You can imagine the diversity of that creativity, how vast it is. But consider this, even though it is immense, the amount of art on the walls is only a fraction of what each of those artists painted, isn't it? They painted many times more than is on the gallery walls, well, maybe except for Picasso. But anyway, but here's the other point. Of the things they painted, how many things did they imagine in their mind that never got on the canvas? Another gigantic, infinite number of art and painting. We have creativity in our DNA. It is part of our divine heritage, and thus we finish with the first purpose of earthly existence, which is to act as co-creators in the vast creative enterprise. That's what it means to be here. That's what it means to be a continuous being. This is the story of you. Thank you.
Okay, we got it? Everybody good? Anything? Any questions in there? Okay, so for folks online, please use the Q&A feature, and Megan will bring your questions into the room. For those of you here, I know there are familiar faces, I'm going to do it anyway. When I bring you the microphone, please speak into the microphone and not near the microphone, over the microphone, because that's not how microphones work. I would ask that you stand if you're able. And with that, we would love to hear your questions. Would anybody like to get us started? Several of you gave me cards, and let's start here.
Well,
I have plenty that we can bring in.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I didn't. We have just established a portal with this QR code. You can scan it with your phone, and it will immediately take you to a place where if you have had a spiritual experience, you can narrate it or write it right into our database where nobody touches it. Pretty cool. Okay.
So I guess I had a question. How did you come up with the 17 FSRs? Because it sounds like that's something that you started with and then validated it with the data.
Are you a plant? That's
No.
the perfect question.
Not on the payroll.
Okay. I thought she was like your secret agent. What was your name, ma'am? Lynn? Lynn. We're not recording anymore, are we?
We are.
Okay, so I can tell you guys, I can tell you some things that, since we're not recording anymore, I can tell you this. I told you about my experience when I was a young man. What I didn't tell you was 26 months ago, I had surgery, came out of surgery, first time in my life. For some reason, I had the most ridiculous 50-year later compulsion to figure out what happened to me 50 years earlier. I could think of nothing else. I go online and I find out that somebody in the intervening 50 years had put hundreds and hundreds of near-death experiences on YouTube. I was shocked and amazed and happy. I looked at a few of them, not very many, and on October 10th, 2 years ago, I went to my computer, and 2 hours later, the Continuum appeared. Now, I've never read philosophy because I thought they were a bunch of nerds. But if any of you have, you can quickly take the Continuum and unravel and completely clear up almost every single philosophical conundrum that's ever been asked. I am not capable of such things. The answer to your question is, I think it was inspiration, or I'm a pretty cool genius. I'll go with the first one.
Here's one of the conundrums that maybe you can take a stab at. And it came through in several of the cards. And I'll pose it a couple different ways for you. What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of my life? In the continuum language, what are those three statements that describe the purpose of earthly existence?
You know, I tried to be a little poetical with that story of you, but to be very direct in the answer to that question, we can do it that way. Consider these facts. Number one, you are an eternal being. You had free will. You chose to come here to this earth. You came here, number one. Look, if you're an immortal being, how do you fully appreciate immortality? What's the obvious answer to that? Experience mortality. If you want to experience hot, try cold. You know, it's not that difficult. So, one of the first reasons we came here was that this is the way we could fully appreciate our own immortalities, by experiencing mortality. The second reason is, when you are immersed in that higher dimensional love, James, you have not got the slightest worry of anything at all, ever. And you have super intelligence. You think of a question, and I mean, it's ridiculous how amazing it is. Here, we experience separateness. We experience aloneness. We experience fear, trepidation, the threat of dying, the threat of oblivion, the threat of annihilation. None of which could be experienced in the higher dimensional realm. And, furthermore, your first purpose is to be a co-creator in the great, eternal creative enterprise. If you kind of imagine, look, we're in a three-dimensional world, it's hard, but if you imagine a cone of creation blasting out eternally, we are all contributing to that vast creative enterprise. And it is wonderfully, unendingly joyous. Just like, look, has anybody here ever painted anything, written anything, composed any music, had a baby, raised a child, restored a car? These are compulsively continuous creative acts. We are creative beings because we reflect our heritage, our genetic, true spiritual DNA. So the three purposes: be co-creators in an entirely new world, learn what mortality, separateness, and aloneness is here, the only place we can. And the next one is to have an individual creative experience. How big is your own experience? Well, I'll answer that. How many thoughts have you had tonight while you've been sitting here? Some of you probably at least a half a dozen. No, thousands of thoughts. How cold am I? How hot am I? How hungry am I? Where's my kids? When's this guy going to shut up? A million thoughts have gone through your head tonight. Every single one of them are part of your own creation. Now, has anybody ever heard of something called the life review in near-death experience? Anybody? Some of you have. This is an experience where 35% of people who have a near-death experience where they review every single experience of their life from birth to the moment of their accident or whatever happened. One gentleman wrote a letter to Huston Smith, the great Christian philosopher. He said, I got hit by a car. My motorcycle was flying through the air. While I was in the air, I experienced my whole life all over again. Every single thought, every single experience. He said, then I had a second life review where I was able to see my life through the eyes of every single person I'd interacted with, how I had affected them, empathically, good, bad, otherwise. Then he had a third review where he did it in reverse, all while he was in the air before he hit the ground. Now, I'll ask you this question. This is a very common experience in near-death experience, life reviews. If every single one of those experiences was not immensely important, why would they be reviewed? They are reviewed because they are part of your great creative heritage. You are magnificent creation machines, as we all are and as all we will ever be. Okay, I took a pretty good shot at that question.
Good swing. We've got some online questions.
Yes, I have two. So the first one, how can I connect more clearly and consistently with the spiritual side? I reach it without knowing how, and once I realize it, the experience ends against my wishes.
Well, boy, isn't that the $64,000 question? Wouldn't we all like to know the cleanest, quickest answer to that? Listen, how many of you, is there anybody here, and you don't have to raise your hand, nothing bad will happen to you, that has had a spiritual experience, a profound spiritual experience? Is there anybody here that has had? Please hold your hand up just quickly. Okay, hold them up high, because I want to count really quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, there's about 15 out of maybe 70 or 80, something like that. That is almost exactly the ratio of people on earth. In the United States, Gallup found that about 15 to 20% of people have had profound spiritual experiences. Why are they looked at so askance? Because we've adopted the scientific mindset in our culture, in Western culture. That's why. And it's wrong when it comes to spiritual experiences, I've just proven. But anyway, those of you that have had that experience, there's nobody that could convince you differently than what you had. And many people who have a deep spiritual experience really don't feel a need to go have another one. They feel content. They feel satisfied. They feel like I've got it, sort of, really. But there's all those seekers that this question addresses, Megan, who are still hoping or still wishing. You know, they're legitimately on it. Okay, so the Continuum is setting up through our gathering group that we're creating the most scientifically advanced way that you can have your own spiritual experience. Do you know that such a thing exists? I'll just mention Dr. Jeffrey Martin. He and his team have proven that between 65 and 80% who follow a certain protocol within 6 or 8 weeks will have such a spiritual experience. It's an amazingly high number. Well, we think we can do at least that good if we work together and figure that piece out. So the answer is, earlier I said, one of the worldview requirements is that worldview should allow seekers to not only experiment with the continuum independently of me, but also experience it for themselves, right? So within the continuum, if you follow along with us, we will research and find the most effective ways for you to have your own spiritual experience. We already know many of them. And we know that the rate of success is close to 80%, which is a gigantic number, as you know. Did I answer that question?
There wasn't any follow-ups online, so we'll assume yes.
I know
think
that
so.
the group here in the room is totally intimidated. They're not asking any questions, and I can understand that. I mean, I'm a really scary guy. I mean, I get that.
Well, we have more from online, so I'm going to give you another one from the online audience.
Okay.
After several NDEs, I have faith in my path, and I also am experiencing a lot of fear moving through depression and trauma. Is my fear altering the path Spirit has shown me?
So, say the last bit again.
Is my fear altering the path the Spirit has shown me?
I didn't quite.
Fear altering the path.
Oh.
I think it's talking
Okay.
about depression and trauma following NDEs.
Okay, so many people, this is such a traumatic experience, it does affect people adversely many times. As I said, when I came, I have to say, James, when I started coming back to myself and I realized I was back in the world of rocks and tables and it was terrible feeling. It was awful. But what she's asking is a little different. She's saying, because of the trauma of that and other emotional experience, whether it's fear or other things, is this somehow interfering with my path going forward? Is that correct? Have I got it right? Okay, sort of. All right, so I'm going to read to you. I mentioned earlier that in my experience, I not only was taken there, but I went with a question about suffering, and when I came back, it took about 12 years for me to fully unpack what the answer I'd been given was. But I was answered. Would you like to know what it is? That's going to cost you. Okay. The answer, I don't have it up, but the answer is the 9th axiom. The 9th axiom states this, and this goes to this lady exactly to her question. Remember, I promised at the beginning I would not ask questions, I would answer every one. Okay. The ninth axiom states, every single experience a person has here in the four-dimensional realm is immeasurably valuable in the higher dimensional realm. And we could just from what we've already learned here, we could give her even more comfort by saying, you are creating an absolutely unique and wonderful experience that has never existed in the universe before. Grab a hold of it and cherish it. Whatever it is. Now, I would offer to her, if I had a moment, to say I would be much more specific about the nature of the fear. I'd want to know what that is, because we could then give much more detailed answer to what her question is. But nonetheless, look, I asked why suffering. Every single human experience is immeasurably valuable in the higher dimensional realm. Dostoevsky asked, how can you justify the bayoneting of babies in the mother's womb by the Turkish soldiers? He didn't answer it, nor did his brother, who was a clergyman. We say that mother and that embryo or that child in the womb both had immeasurably valuable experiences. Now let me ask you this question, part of the answer. Let's say that from there to across this whole room, every inch represents 1,000 years of time. That's a long time, isn't it? How long is your life in that measure? Right? That's the length of that's your 100 years right here. That much. Does any of you moms ever have a child riding a bicycle skin their knee? In the moment of the skinning, how terrified and scared and painful is it for the child? Oh my gosh, they scream bloody murder. And it does hurt. It's hurting me right now to think about, a skin knee, frankly. But our perspective as parents is, this is only for a moment, and in a little while you won't even remember that pain. Well, our life is much shorter in this grand picture than the skinning of a knee. Much, much, much shorter. Okay, question. Oh, look at this. We have a grand prize winner.
Pete Thompson.
Pete.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. Once you or I or he have been exposed to this higher dimensional realm, like you have, why would you ever want to come back to this hoax?
As Ebert called it, yes.
I'm trying to think. I think if I were exposed to it, coming back here would be such a bore. If I had the full meaning of life, coming back would be, such a bore. Get me out of here. Why would you come back?
Well, this is actually, you've uncovered a tremendously cool mystery about all of these experiences. They are controlled by the other side.
Who's they?
The experience itself.
Oh.
I was abducted into heaven. I did not volunteer. I didn't say, okay, punch my ticket, let's go. I was minding my own business. Years later, bam! There I am. It's kind of like, I have to say, the great creative presence has a great grinning sense of humor, because I didn't get any tunnel or any guides or any halfway house or any kind of counseling to get there. It was here and bam! The biggest, and I'm sure he thought that was pretty hilarious, at the moment. But to answer your question, sir, there's not one single instant or moment of this life that is mundane or boring. Every single human experience is immeasurably valuable. You, sir, and all of you. We know this, by the way, even from the little we know about quantum physics, we know this is true. It's just more true than they can imagine. That no experience can be perfectly duplicated. We know this, right? It's impossible to duplicate. This thing we're doing right here, this collection of thoughts and atoms and quantum physical quarks bouncing around, it can never be duplicated again, ever. We have created something entirely new, and you are contributing right this minute to your highest purpose of co-creation with the great creative enterprise. So, if there is a feeling of mundaneness or boredom or satiation. It is our own creation, that feeling. It is not reality. Now, but to the second half of your question about why would you come back? No way I was coming back, dude. I was in the place that is the greatest you can ever possibly imagine from the perspective of this earthly perspective that I have of all that. If I had full awareness to my higher dimensional Archedon, I would have said, hey, dude, you volunteered to come here. That's why you're here. You volunteered to experience mortality, separation. See, you know what the beauty of the second condition of reality is? The second condition of reality is free will is eternal. So who's responsible for you being here? Everybody raise your hand. Okay. Who's responsible for being bored? Who's responsible for every experience we have? Now, the beauty of that, sir, Pete, is that if we can convince people with this scientific evidence that that is true, that will change people's actions immediately. Because we will all, as my mentor in college, the great Stephen Covey, said, stop sacrificing the great at the altar of the good. Don't just be good enough, cool enough, okay enough. Invest in your vast creative endowment and go for the great, whatever that is for you. As the great Joseph Campbell said, find your bliss. This is the highest expression of that creative opportunity. And you in this room, by the way, are among the most blessed people in the history of humanity. Of the 105 billion beings that have ever been born, the people in this room are in the pinnacle 1,000% of blessed. Now, the question you have to ask is, what the hell am I doing with it? Am I sacrificing the great that I am capable of, even now, at the altar of just the good? Did I answer your question, sir? Okay.
We've
Thank
got
you.
time for one more.
Steve Bell. My question would go, I'd like to go back to a previous one about essentially why children suffer, or why there's suffering in the world, especially for children. To say that the child's suffering is part of an immeasurably larger experience as part of the continuum, to me personally, is not very satisfying, because it still really doesn't address the question of why children suffer.
Okay.
Unless we assume that this is an irrational world with no guidance, no being, it just happens.
What was your name, sir?
Stephen.
Okay, Stephen, I'm going to use your name in vain now. I'm going to use your name in vain. Okay? Stephen, can we get serious now? I'm going to assume that you asked me a serious question. So I'm going to give you a serious answer, sir. In any given moment, do you choose pleasure over pain?
Do I choose?
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure.
In any given moment, do you choose pleasure over pain?
Mostly, yes.
Yeah. I'd say we'd all say yes to that, would we not?
Yes.
Our nature is genetically, to avoid pain. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our long human heritage to avoid pain. But we can't. It's impossible. But if we put over here the highest ecstasy, the best pleasurable experiences we can have in this life, we'll just put them all over here on this side. Let's suppose that's all there was. Let's suppose that's all there was, but just pleasure, 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 without any contrast of suffering. Would you even know that it's pleasure, sir?
Probably not.
You would not. 100%. You could not. Oh, it does. Because without the contrast of exactly the opposite of the best things, the greatest things, the most pleasurable things, those would not exist. They could not exist.
Is there a special case in the question that started your journey of saying, if I'm God and I create the universe, I say children can't experience suffering until they are old enough to process? Is there a special case for that?
Yeah, that was my special argument, which is sort of yours, except you want to extend it all the way out to, our age. But, yeah. But look, let's just go with this. Let me put, the answer to your question actually, look, this is the most complicated question mankind has ever faced. We'd all agree on that. It has been around since ever. And the greatest philosophers it's stuck in their craw. Now, I can answer that question in great detail with just 5 pieces from the continuum, but they all have to work in concert. It's not just a simple yes or no, and it shouldn't be. It's an extremely difficult question to answer, but if you want to stick around, we'll walk through it. More than what I've just done, anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our time. Would you join me in thanking Archedon?